Hello everyone. Today I want to take a look at the Rails API boilerplate that I teased 2 weeks ago maybe. So the basic premise of this is it is a production ready API built with Ruby on Rails that you'll then be able to expand upon. So if we take a look at what's included out of the box, of course we have a lovely little diagram here that sort of shows you what the request lifecycle is like. And I'll have some links in the video description as I cover this, but I'll try and explain wherever there's a relevant video. Essentially, when you make a request to the Rails application, you'll be going through a application operation, which is going to take you into the contracts that we covered in the Friday video, so the video before this one. And if the contract is successful, and remember, a contract's essentially your additional validation stage. So if your validation succeeds there, if the contract is, inputting and outputting what it's expecting, then you'll go through your successful process failure stage, and then eventually you'll render a response. Because remember, your entire API lifecycle is just request response, right? So assuming all of that works out, you'll have your response returned. And why this is so useful is because we have the contracts built into this API. So if we take a look at the contracts here, you can see that this uses the dry validation gem that I was talking about in the previous video about the contract gem, which allows you to generate specific contracts for whatever you're trying to build out. So in this case, the example is the user registration. I'm trying to make sure you can see this. So you have those. It also generates a test for those contracts for a bit of redundancy. We also have a service generator, which we can take a look at, which allows you to create small little services using the dry-monads gem. And of course, this is going to allow you to create very small pieces of logic for your create, update, destroy, and effectively your read services. So that is another generator you have access to with this. And then you also have an example of how to do searching, filtering, and sorting with the ransack gem, which we've also covered on the channel before. So it's sort of tying all of those things together into a very useful example for a production API. And the reason why it's a bit more of a production API is because it also includes the Swagger documentation. So if you've never seen this before, it's something we've covered on the channel, but effectively by creating these structures in some Ruby code in your application, it allows you to create an API documentation endpoint. So here I have the server running that we're going to be creating today, which takes you to this home page, which shows you how to use the Doorkeeper authentication. If you're not familiar with Doorkeeper, we've also covered this before on the channel with 2 videos that I highly recommend watching. It's going to be about 2.5 hours, but this is going to cover setting up a Devise Doorkeeper application using React and Rails. So this will allow you to log in, log out through an API, as well as maintaining if I go back a bit in the video, maintaining a Rails side of the portal as well. So you have your API, but you also have the ability to not spell another one correctly. But you can log into the Rails backend if you'd like to do that. So we're only going to be covering a very small subset of all of the features available, but hopefully this will be enough to get you started with this template. And it is a GitHub template, so you'll be able to clone it, and it seems to be fairly well maintained. Again, this is another repository by Nejdetkadir, which was the creator of the template for the Doorkeeper tutorial. So yeah, we're just going to take a look at this and hopefully get through this pretty quickly. So all we're going to be doing is we're going to be cloning the repository and creating a basic user account. So I'm going to show you how to get this stuff set up essentially. So the way we do this is we start by cloning the repo. So because this is a template, it allows you to click use this template, which will then create a Rails repository for you. So for this, I'll just call this API boilerplate Rails. So this creates your repository from the template, which then allows you to clone the repository as you normally would. So let me full screen this actually. So now we have this copy of the repository. We come in here, we copy the actual repo, then we can do a git clone. Let me bump up the font size a bit. git clone, we paste in the URL, and then it'll clone it for us. We can then cd into whatever that directory was called. And now it's going to be a really long URL or a really long path because I'm dumb, but you'll just have to bear with me. So now that we have that, there's a couple things we have to be aware of. The actual README does cover some of the setup, but the setup won't necessarily work for you out of the box. First thing you want to do is, let me try to get this to work properly, is run a bundle install command. I'll full screen this. Chances are you'll see a bunch of gems you've never seen before get installed there. After you have that, you're now going to want to make sure that you have your Postgres database up and running. So sudo service PostgreSQL start. And for me, this should already be running. I just typoed my password, but it ultimately doesn't matter. So for me, it says it's already running, so that's good. The other thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you have your Redis server set to daemonize, or at least to make sure that it's running. And the reason why you want that is because this is going to error out if you don't have both of those running. Now, the next thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to open up this, this code base, and you're going to need to come into your config and your database.yaml. So the reason why we're coming in here is because you're going to have to, of course, change the database credentials. So at a bare minimum, you're going to have your database, and then you're going to have to give this a host of localhost. And this is very heavily commented. So if I come in here and I bump up the font size a bit, you should be able to see it. There's a whole bunch of very helpful comments about all of the stuff that you can use here. But pretty much the only things that I added were a port, a host, and a password. And my password in this case is just password. Sorry if my voice sounds weird. I'm still recovering from a cold. The other thing I did was I came down to the test database down here, and I got rid of the username, and I just left the password as password, because all of this is sort of how I have my Postgres set up. You're of course going to have to change this depending on what your setup is like. So once this is done, I'm going to come over to my original application and stop it, and I'm going to stop this other one as well. Once this is done, you should now be good to try to run a Rails DB create. In my case, I'm going to have to do a drop first because I need to clear out my database. Apparently I had a console running, so I'm going to go ahead and stop that. There we go. So now that you have it stopped, you're going to run into an issue if you try to do a Rails DB : I think migrate. And the migration error is going to be caused by the way that the user IDs are being generated. Now, I'm not entirely familiar with how to do the UUID generation, but the workaround that I found for this specific error is to add in the functionality to generate these before the other migrations are run. So if we come into our DB and our migrate, we have our two migration files here. We're just going to right-click New File, and we're going to create a first migration. You can name this whatever you want to, but I'm going to prefix mine with a 0. That way it appears at the beginning of the list so that this is the first migration to run. Once that's done, all we're going to do is we're going to create a empty class called enable extensions, which is going to inherit from our active record migration 7.0. We're then going to do a def change. And then in here, we're going to enable two different extensions. I don't know if these two are necessary. These are just the two that worked for me. And what these are going to do are allow you to generate these UUIDs. So once this is done, you should then be able to try to run a Rails DB : migrate command. And you should see that the migrations work as expected. You're going to have your Devise users created, and then you're going to have your Doorkeeper tables created, which is going to allow you to effectively do everything else. The last thing you're going to want to do is come into your seeds file and just create a small little Doorkeeper application. Because of how Doorkeeper works, you're always going to have a application that you do your authentication through. So you can think of this like if you go to a website, you get your own client ID and your secret, you're effectively doing the same thing here. You're just giving yourself that entire application. So we'll call this like, I don't know, Vite app, because we're going to be creating a Vite app. And then we'll give it a scopes of read and write. And you can give it a redirect URL if you'd like as well. Once that's done, we can then go ahead and try to run a Rails DB seed to create that application. And then we can go ahead and run a bin/dev, which should try to install the Foreman gem if you don't have it. And then you'll see that Sidekick is hopefully running, assuming everything else is set up correctly. And now if we go to localhost port 3000, you should see the Swagger boilerplate up and running. This will tell you where to go to if you want to create like a new user session, if you want to log out of a user session, if you want to sign up for a new account, or if you want to reset your password or update your password. So really the important ones here are this OAuth token for logging in, the sign up, and the revoke. Now in terms of the actual how you do these actions, I have the video that I'll link in the video description, which covers a lot of the setup. But just for the sake of doing this, we're going to do a simple login, and we're just going to display the user that we're logged in as on the homepage. For now, we don't have this app, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to create it. You have two options. You can either stop the server or you can just open up a new tab. I'm going to go with the new tab route, just so that we can sort of keep everything running. And then I'm going to cd into that repository, which I think I called API boilerplate. And let me just make sure inside of here we have another API boilerplate. Okay. Now in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a npx create dash Vite, I think, or is it Vite create? I don't know. We'll just run this and we'll see what happens. It seems like it needs to install a create Vite app, and that's fine. And now that we have that, we can go ahead and name this. Now this is going to be our actual client that connects to our API. So I'm just going to call mine Frontend, and that's just going to create a front-end application inside of our Rails app. I'm going to go with React. It really doesn't matter what you use here. I'm going to go with basic React, and now we have our front-end folder right here. I'm going to cd into front-end, and I'm going to follow these instructions. So I'm going to run a npm install, and that's going to do the initial installation for the Vite app for us. Once that's done, the other thing I want to do real quick, just because we're going to use it, is I'm just going to install Axios. Now I should point out right now there is a not a vulnerability, but there is an error with the latest Axios release as of the time of this recording, I believe. So if you are on that specific build, there is a chance Axios might not work for you, so you might want to go back a previous version. I'm not entirely sure which version. I just read the article this morning, so that's just something to be aware of. But okay, now that we have this, let's go ahead and run a npm run dev and hopefully get my console to stop erroring out. That's going to open up our React app on port 3001, but that's fine. It's just something for us to look at for now. Now that that's done, we'll come into our front end, our SRC, and our app.js. Now I'm not going to go through an entire React app here because I feel like the 2.5 hour video that I have linked will probably cover that more than I'll possibly be able to here. But we're just going to do a very quick login system so that we can log in with an API request so that you can see that this works just like every other React app on the face of the planet. So we're going to start by doing a user set state and the use state here. We're then going to do a const for a client ID, which we're going to get from our application that we created in our Doorkeeper. And we're going to have a client secret. So to get these, all we have to do is come into our Rails console. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up a terminal in my VS Code, run a Rails C. And then inside of our Rails console, what I'm going to do is a Doorkeeper : application. And that should show us that we have an established connection. I'm going to do a .first to get the first one. And then I'm going to need the UID, which is this one right here. Or I can just do doorkeeper.first.uid. So I'm going to need that one. And then I'm going to need the .secret as well, which is filtered in the overall one. But if we do a specific call, we can get it. So we'll just go ahead. We'll grab the UID, put that into our client ID. We'll grab the secret, put that into our client secret. Now, of course, in an actual application, you would want this to be in like a encrypted file, an environment variable, something, not just in your code. Definitely don't push this up to GitHub. This is not best practice, but this is just sort of for the sake of showing you how to do this. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a basic login function. So we'll just say const login. And then in here, we're going to create some data. And we're doing the data like this because the request is going to require a couple things. Now, off the top of my head, I don't remember what they are. Of course, I have my notes, but I'm trying to pretend, so bear with me. If we come over to our Swagger documentation and we look for the user session, we go to /user/OAuth/token. That's what we want to go to. And then in here, we can scroll down and we can see that this right here is effectively what we need. We're going to replace some of this information, but we can pretty much just grab this, paste it in, and this is going to be what we need to pass in. Now we do still need to create a user, and to do this, we're just going to do it in the Rails console as well. So we're going to say user.create, and then we're going to do a email, which is going to be dean@example.com, comma, and let me bump up the font size a bit so you can see this, comma, password. The password, oops, that's not good. Let me full screen this maybe. The password is just going to be password, and the password underscore confirmation. Oh, this is really not enjoying what I'm doing to it right now. Is going to be password. Hopefully after I run this, I can show you the full line. Okay, VS Code errors aside, you're just doing a user.create, passing in an email, a password, and a password confirmation. So once that's done, you should then hopefully have a user to work with. And the way we can test this actually is we'll just come into our Rails console again one last time, and we'll just do a user.first, and that'll get us our first user. We can see it has a random user ID because of the UUIDs being generated, but the rest of the information is there. And we pretty much don't need that. So I'm just going to close out of the console for now and close out of this because we've effectively gathered all of the info that we need. We just need to replace in here. So our grant type is going to stay as a password. I'm going to full screen this. Our email is going to be, in my case, dean@example.com. Password is going to stay as password. Then we're going to pass in the client ID for the client ID and the client secret for the client secret. The last thing we then have to do is the Axios request. So for this, we'll do a Axios. This is going to be a post request, and it's going to go to whatever the URL in here told us to. So /users/OAuth/token. So we'll just say /users/OAuth/token. We then have our data. So then we can do a .then where we have our response, and then we'll just do set user where we do response.data.user. Afterwards, we need to do some parentheses, and then we'll do a .catch for the error, and we'll just console log the error because we can't be bothered to handle our problems like an adult. Once all of that's done, the last thing we have to do is come down here and we'll just clear out this boilerplate. And what we'll do instead is we'll just have a H1 that just says the API. And for now, I'm just going to do this so we can see what's happening. So I'm going to come over here and you'll see it just says the API. Open up the console and you'll see that there's really nothing going on right now. What we can do is we can create a quick use effect where we just call login. So we'll just say use effect. I'll hit enter. And then hopefully GitHub Copilot will autocomplete the syntax. So I don't have to, but it doesn't seem like it wants to. So in here, we're just going to call login, and we're going to pass in a comma and an empty array so that this only runs once when the page initially loads. I'm going to save this, and we're going to see that Axios is not defined. So we do have to import Axios from Axios. And now we can see that the request went through to an extent, but we are running into an error. And the reason is because this still says port 8000 instead of port 3000. So that's a bit of my bad there. Now we're not getting an error, but we're also not seeing anything. So the last thing we want to do is below our H1, we just want to probably log out what the current user is. So I'll say H3 current user : and then let's just do user. And let's see what this gives us. So if we try to do that, it tells us we can't because this is a React child. So let's just do user email. And there we go. So to see fully what it gives us, because right now it's just giving us our email, you could come in here and do a console.log for the response, save that, and then we'll throw all of that into our console here. If we expand this, we can see inside of our data, we actually have an access token, created at, expires in, refresh token, token type, and then the actual user. If we expand the user, we can see it comes with an email, the ID, and the user type. If we look at the Swagger UI, we can actually scroll down here past our example. And down here under responses, we can see the successful response shows us the same thing, or gives us the entire outline of the response schema that we got, including what the user contains. So this is sort of just a basic rundown of how this works. You can, of course, take this a bit further, because if we look at, for example, the contract generator, if you wanted to, what you can do is you can run like a scaffold generator. So you can say Rails G scaffold maybe, or I guess you wouldn't want to do a scaffold, Rails G. Well, let's just do a scaffold. We'll say Rails G scaffold for, I don't know, posts. And then you can generate your posts, and then you can do like a Rails G contract for your posts. And then you could do a, what was the other one? The services. If I come up here to the service generator, you could do a Rails G service post : I don't know, CRUD maybe, if you wanted to call it that. And that would create your CRUD service. So we could then come into our Explorer, our app, and let's say our services. We can see our post service has the CRUD, which has the create, destroy, list, and update inside of it, where all of these things are sort of done for you. And the list even includes a ransack query already being handled for you with pagination included. So there's a lot to explore here. I don't want to cover everything because I feel like this video is already long enough. But hopefully this sort of gives you some desire to explore a bit and see what else you can do, because it is quite powerful and it is very structured. So if you're looking for something that you could grow an application with, where you have that structure and that experience of someone that knows what they're doing, which Lord knows it's not me. But if you look at the Shftco, they definitely seem to know what they're doing, and they have a very nice structure for the overall API. So I definitely recommend checking this out and giving it a shot. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. That's going to do it for me. Hopefully this video was helpful, and hopefully I will see you in the next tutorial.